Okay, I have wiped off my original compound. I've now switched pads to a foam, what's called a hook and loop backing. It's like basically it's a glorified name for Velcro, but they can't use the name Velcro because it's a name brand. So it's hook and loop. This is all the polish I'm using. It is Menzerna Superior Performance Polish. I'm using it with what's referred to as a cutting foam pad. Very different than a cutting wool pad. So this is where you can literally fine tune between your selection of polishes, pads, pressure, speed, duration, which means how long you spend on an area. You can literally custom tune it. Now I'll tell you that using a foam pad is different than a wool pad in that it's harder to control, it's a smaller area, and there is nuances to these pads. Like this pad will burn materials differently than a wool pad. I'm not going to go into detail on that, but just know it's different. So while I could do this with one hand, it requires far more concentration on my part and far more strength to do it. I'm just kind of demonstrating. That's just for demonstration purposes. It's not that I'm really advocating you polish with one hand. I'm just saying is that a wool pad is hard, or a foam pad is harder to control. You might be wondering why I don't have this taped off. Well, that's because I know the foam pad is less aggressive. What you can't interpret or discern is that as I'm polishing, you'll notice that I kind of went up to the edge at the end rather than kept crossing over it. At the very beginning, I went over that character line or that mountain ridge. So that takes care of any swirl marks right through the ridge. Now I just need to focus on the flat panels, but I'm far less concerned about burning this edge than I was initially, so therefore I don't need to tape it off at this point. But once again, I'm responding appropriately to the information. And you'll notice that sometimes even me, after this many years, I'll get a little like what's called a buffer hop. And until you've been on the end of a buffer, you can teach a lot, you just can't replace true experience. So until you've experienced it firsthand, it's hard to know what it's like. So simply put, it is more difficult with the foam pad when it comes to a rotary polisher. That's not to scare you away, it's just to inform you. See, with that edge, let's pretend this was the edge. I can either keep it basically with that edge, or I can put the buffer up on top of that edge. So you can't really tell, but what I'm doing is that I'm keeping this at a slight angle so it's perfectly flat with this panel rather than tilting it up to try to get this panel. So I'm going to keep it flat to this panel and then flat to that panel, and then just slightly polish, very light pressure across this high point. So you can't really tell from that angle, but that's what I'm doing, is I'm not rotating it over it. I'll make a quick pass across it flat, but right here, I'm keeping it as flat and parallel with this panel itself. This is the panel I'm focused on. Next, I'll go over to this panel and I will keep it flat to that, so that I'm basically meeting in the middle, but I'm keeping my pad always flat on the panel I'm dealing with. So if you were to look down at an angle, you would see that once I get like this, there's going to be a gap in between the pad and the panel. And right now, all I'm doing is, because the sanding marks have been polished away, now what I'm trying to remove is what would be called holograms, the new word du jour, because buffing tracks or swirl marks is unacceptable, because we had to come up with a more glorified word which sounds better and more special, and that's called holograms. I don't like the word personally. I think it just confuses people. So right now with the foam pad and this fine polish, I'm just trying to remove the heavy duty swirl marks, buffer tracks that will be left as a result of using the wool pad to cut away or polish away or compound away, pick whichever label works for you, the sanding marks. Okay, we have completion. This took me 2 hours. Let's see, double check. Okay, 2.5 hours. Start to finish. That included talking time with my customer, which is this car dealer. You know, he's an independent car dealer, does wholesale and retail. This is a retail car. Bought it from the auction at wholesale. Adds a little TLC into it and emphasis on little, because these dealerships do the bare minimum. They're on the bare minimum plan as a rule. And if you're a car dealer and you're watching this, well, guess what? Cliches and stereotypes exist for a reason, okay? This is one of those moments where I'm done being nice. I'm just going to call a spade. And the same with my industry. It is saturated with flaky guys that are hacks. I'm okay with that. Okay, that actually is the good news to me, because it means it is easier for me to rise above the pond or the bottom dwellers of the industry. Okay, because I represent the full package. So if you as a detailer or want to be a detailer, this is good information, and that's about delivering the full package, and that includes trust, building trust, doing what you say you're going to do. Always, always, always. You know, you never flake. You show up when you say you're going to show up. You call back when you say you're going to call back. People will overlook a lot of mistakes if you get those other things right. Trust me on this one. You can do like even marginal work, but if you show up on time, you call back when you say you're going to call back or when you're supposed to, you just do all the things that most people are unwilling to do. It's part of this whole culture that's you know, the all about me, all of what feels good type of culture that we have been being groomed to believe as a culture. So, original point, these independent dealers as well as the big brand name dealers, when it comes to used cars, they do as little as possible to make as much money as possible. They're not about building equity or long-term relationships, even though they'll tell you all day long that they are. But unfortunately, you can't reconcile what comes out of their mouth with their actions. So once again, actions speak louder than words. So this car, the sanding, the polishing is complete. I couldn't, oh, there's one right. I was trying to find a scratch because this scratch was this hood was so scratched up, and that was the reason my dealer customer, because it was just so glaring that he knew that the customer would probably take note of it and it would be unacceptable. So it's only when they get pushed far enough into a corner where they're finally going to reach out to someone who knows what they're doing and say, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to spend an extra $100, whatever. Okay. So in response to someone that asked, do I do dealer work? Generally I run away from it because they're cheap A's. It's different between frugal and just being a bottom line cheap A. Right here's a scratch. It's probably not going to show up. The point is, I was referencing it earlier, is that until you sand a scratch away completely, as you polish it, now it's just a polished scratch. Yes, you can't see it because it's been sanded and polished so much, but has it been flattened away 100%? No, it has not. But virtually I removed 98% of the scratches, and they were pretty significant. Okay, so next time we will catch you on the flip side.